How would you react if you walked into a place you built with your own hands, only to be refused service by the very people working there, just because they thought you didn't belong? Not because you dressed strangely, not because you did anything wrong, but simply because you didn't look important. This isn't a fictional story. It happened. To a woman who once lived in her car, washed glasses behind the bar, and was once told she wasn't cut out for more. But just 12 weeks after that moment, she transformed the entire system from the inside out and turned the quiet little table where she used to sit alone into a new symbol of respect and understanding. This story isn't about power. It's about justice, born from silence in a turning point no one saw coming. Watch until the end, because once you find out who she really is, you'll never look at a service worker the same way again. The December wind howled through every gap in the window panes, sending sharp gusts of cold air into the small diner nestled under a flickering neon sign that read, Rosie's Diner, open 24 hours. On the street outside, coated with melting snow and black sand, the light from inside barely illuminated the muddled tracks left by passing feet. The wall clock ticked steadily. It was 2:49 a.m. Inside the diner, Lena Morrison, wearing an old cream-colored apron over a silvery gray button-up shirt, leaned over the counter, wiping the same faint coffee stain again and again. It was the third time she'd cleaned that exact spot in 10 minutes. Not because it was that dirty, but because there was nothing else to do. No customers, nothing to talk about, nothing to think about that didn't make her heart sink. The 28-year-old had been working the night shift at Rosie's for nearly 2 years. Never missed a single shift, never came in late, and she'd never really left the place either. After every shift, while her coworkers went home, Lena walked out to the back parking lot, where a 2004 Chevy Impala sat quietly under a broken streetlight. She lived in that car. It was her bedroom, her hiding place, the only home she had left after all the things she no longer wanted to explain to anyone. On her left wrist, a faint bruise still lingered, the mark from Mr. Clay's grip, the night shift manager, when she had dared to give an old customer an extra sugar packet without charging him. Rosie's ain't no charity, Morrison, he growled. The stench of cigarettes mixed with stale alcohol on his breath made Lena tilt her head away, even though she knew doing so would only make him more annoyed. But she didn't argue. She never did. She knew very well. In her position, one wrong word at the wrong time could mean losing her place to sleep that night. A soft chime sounded from the entrance. The glass door, pushed open by the wind, swung inward, causing the little bell above the frame to jingle helplessly. Lena looked up instinctively. A man was stepping inside, soaked from head to toe. Water dripped from the hem of his long coat onto the worn-out linoleum floor, leaving a trail behind him, as if he had just trudged through an entire snowstorm just to find a place with a light on. He didn't look like the usual late-night customers. Not a truck driver, not a shift worker from the nearby industrial zone. No baseball cap, no grease-stained work uniform. He didn't even look like a traveling businessman. His charcoal gray sweater and dark jeans, though now soaked, still showed clean stitching and soft fabric, clearly made for cleaner places than this. His face was sharp and angular, but tired. Rain-soaked black hair clung to his forehead. He stood still for a few seconds by the entrance, silent, his eyes scanning the quiet diner. Lena pulled a menu from under the counter and walked over to the table by the window. That spot was colder than the others, closer to the draft. But the man didn't choose a warmer corner. He sat there facing the kitchen directly, where he could see the lone cook working behind the counter on the few late-night orders. Long night shift, huh? Lena smiled gently as she placed the menu on the table. Her smile wasn't the fake kind used to fish for tips. It was something simpler, sadder, like a greeting that didn't expect a reply. The man looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. There was no awkwardness, no pity, just an emotion hard to name, like he had seen someone he used to know in another life. Just a cup of black coffee, he said, voice hoarse and soft, carrying a hint of exhaustion and cold air. No attitude, no demand. Just a quiet, small request. Black coffee, Lena repeated, nodding. But as she turned to walk away, she suddenly paused. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the way those rain-soaked shoulders sagged more than they should have. Maybe she saw herself in him, a person not calling for help, but clearly needing something. Anything. "Hold on a second," she said, and headed back to the counter. In the supply closet beside the kitchen, between bottles of floor cleaner and grease rags, there was a navy blue towel, the only clean one she had left. It was a keepsake from the apartment she used to live in 3 years ago, before her world shrank down to the size of a car's back seat. The towel wasn't fancy, but it was clean, thick, and held a trace of humanity. She returned to the table, placing the steaming mug of coffee in front of the man, then gently set the towel beside it. "A clean towel. No one else has used it. Feel free to dry off. People don't come here at this hour unless they've got nowhere else to go." The man looked at the towel like she had just handed him a diamond. He touched it carefully as if afraid to dirty it. "I can't accept this. You might need it for someone else." "Trust me," Lena smiled. "There won't be anyone else coming in tonight." He gave a faint chuckle, for the first time, and nodded gratefully. In that brief moment, the whole world seemed to soften. The wind still howled outside, but inside the little diner, the warmth of a coffee cup and a towel created something very close to compassion. Lena didn't know that the man, Nathaniel Quinn, wasn't a random traveler, nor was he lost. He was the founder of the entire Heartfire restaurant chain, currently on an anonymous inspection tour of the Midwest locations. And tonight, for the first time after dozens of stops, he had truly seen the very thing he'd somehow let slip from his empire. A soul, not highly paid, not highly educated, but someone who cared, who was kind, and who gave even when she had nothing left. He didn't say another word. He just sat there quietly sipping his coffee, still holding on to the towel she gave him. And Lena, not quite knowing why, stayed nearby, wiping already clean tables, refilling a sugar jar that didn't need it, just so she wouldn't have to walk away from that quiet warmth. She had no idea that within just a few hours, that very man would shake the foundations of the tiny world she had been desperately trying to hold together. Nathaniel Quinn sat silently in the small hotel room in downtown Rockford Springs, eyes fixed on the screen of his laptop displaying the latest internal audit report from Heartfire Hospitality. Though it was nearing 5 a.m., he hadn't slept, his mind spinning with images from the tiny diner called Rosie's. The image of the waitress with dark circles under her eyes but a gentle smile. The sight of a towel laid beside a cup of coffee like an unspoken greeting, and the reflection of his own weary face in the misty glass window. Over the past 3 months, he had visited multiple locations in his restaurant chain, disguised as a drifter, a lost traveler, sometimes just a silent figure in the night, trying to feel what was truly happening within the empire he had spent years building. Heartfire, the name he coined in 2010 when he opened his first restaurant in Ohio. Inspired by the founding philosophy that a restaurant should kindle a fire of the heart, a place where everyone, whether rich or poor, customer or staff, felt respected and welcomed. But 12 years later, with over 280 locations, what remained seemed to be nothing more than profit charts, cold Zoom meetings, and KPI spreadsheets forwarded from regional managers. He no longer recognized the original Heartfire in any of it. And then, last night, in the middle of Colorado's ruthless snowstorm, he found it, unexpectedly and quietly, in the simple gesture of a waitress who had no idea she was standing before the chairman of the entire corporation. Lena Morrison. He had made sure to note her name in his phone. He had observed her for over 3 hours before even stepping into the diner. From his rented car seat, he watched her take out the trash, check every corner of the kitchen, and then sit alone at the bar, scrubbing the countertop even though it already gleamed. When Clay, the night manager, appeared and began barking orders, Nathaniel didn't look away. The man was tall, loud, every footstep exaggerated for attention. Nathaniel watched him move in on Lena, saw his hand grip her wrist, saw her flinch slightly and nod in apology. Not a word of protest, not a sound. She simply stepped back toward the sink and resumed her task. Those images twisted something in Nathaniel's gut. He reopened his notes. Clearly written. Branch number 118, Rosie's Diner, Rockford Springs. Manager, Walter Clay. Status, staff under threat, toxic environment, employee morale severely degraded. Observed over 3 hours. Clay uses demeaning language, inappropriate physical contact, high psychological pressure, recommend immediate investigation. Below that section was a short paragraph he had typed moments after leaving the diner. Lena Morrison, night shift waitress, exceptionally patient, cautious, and polite work style, acts of kindness toward a stranger without any ulterior motive, offered personal towel and free coffee during a snowstorm. That kind of action cannot be trained. That is character. He leaned back, eyes closed, but his mind was still racing. Over the course of 3 months undercover, he had seen many disappointing things. Employees dozing off, managers skimming cash, chefs abandoning shifts with no explanation. But he had never met anyone like Lena. Not because she was flawless, but because she wasn't pretending. She didn't need to be seen. She did the right thing simply because it was the right thing to do. And in the cold, profit-driven world he now oversaw, such intrinsic goodness was as rare as a candle still burning in a storm. Nathaniel shut the laptop, stood up, put on his long coat, and stepped into the hotel hallway. The sky had not yet lightened, but the snow had stopped. He couldn't sit still. He needed to go back to Rosie's, not as a stranger, but as his real self. At 3 p.m., Lena arrived at the diner 20 minutes early, as she always did. A strange feeling lingered in her from the night before. Not quite hope, but something like warmth seeping into the bones after a long fever. The $20 bill she received from the stranger was still in the pocket of her coat, unused. Not because she was afraid to spend it, but because she couldn't bring herself to. A small gesture, a man without a name, and a thank you smile had made her feel, if only for a moment, that she existed. She was tying her apron when the bell on the door rang. Lena looked up, nearly dropping the pen in her hand. The man from the previous night walked in. But this time, he wasn't wearing a wet sweater, no longer weighed down by a storm. Instead, he was dressed in a sleek charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, polished leather shoes, and carried the piercing gaze of someone used to presiding over boardroom tables. His hair was neatly combed, his coat pressed, and every step he took seemed to silence the entire atmosphere of Rosie's. Clay was behind the kitchen counter yelling at the dishwasher. When he saw the man, he immediately stopped, adjusted his collar, and walked over with a nervous smile. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Walter Clay, the night shift manager here at Rosie's. How can I help you today?" The man didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on Lena standing behind the counter. No words, no nod. Just a long gaze that made Lena want to sink into the floor. He was looking at her, but no longer as someone in need of help. Now he was someone who could alter her entire fate with a single sentence. "Actually," he began, his voice clear and steady, "I'd like to speak to the entire staff on duty right now. Could you gather everyone here within the next 3 minutes?" Clay froze for a second, then forced a chuckle. Of course, sir." Lena stood frozen. She didn't know what was happening, but her instincts screamed that things were slipping out of control. The man from last night, the one she thought was a lost traveler in need of shelter, was far from anonymous. He was someone with the authority to summon the entire diner. He was someone who could determine her future, and if he had come to report her for giving away free coffee, she might lose both her job and her only place to sleep by the end of the day. What she didn't know was that in that very moment, Nathaniel was wrestling with an important decision. He had intended to reveal his identity immediately, but when he saw the fear in Lena's eyes, the slight tremble in her hand as she fastened her apron, he knew, if he spoke now, she wouldn't believe it. Her kindness would be dismissed as a miscalculated move. She'd be embarrassed. She'd shut down, and he would lose the only chance to understand the heart of this girl. He would wait, observe, and when the time was right, he would reach out, not to bestow favors, but to rekindle a fire his own system had long forgotten. Lena Morrison had never felt time move this slowly. From the moment the man in the cool gray suit stepped into Rosie's diner and asked to speak to all staff members, everything seemed to unfold in a film reel stretched thin. Clay's footsteps sounded louder than usual. The clinking of plates in the kitchen struck her nerves like taut strings, and the eyes of every employee began turning toward the man standing at the center of the diner. A man who, just the night before, had been a rain-drenched stranger sitting silently in a corner. cradling a cup of coffee and a towel as if they were the last things in the world he could hold on to. But now he wasn't the man she had seen in the storm. He was something else entirely. Cold, decisive, and clearly more important than anyone Lena had ever met. She fought the urge to tear off her apron and bolt, but her legs were stiff. She wondered if last night had been discovered. Had Clay said something? Or had the man himself, this man, come to reprimand her? She knew Rosie's policies by heart, even down to the fine print on the laminated rules posted behind the walk-in freezer door. No complimentary items may be given, including coffee, unless approved by a regional manager. Violating that policy meant immediate termination. She'd seen others fired for simply splitting a leftover pie with an elderly customer who couldn't pay. If it was her turn now, she wouldn't be surprised. But what terrified her even more than losing her job was losing her last place of shelter, the old car behind the diner. If she no longer worked here, she couldn't park there overnight. And if she couldn't park her car, she'd have nothing left. Clay's voice rang out, snapping her out of her thoughts. All afternoon and night shift staff, front and center, now! Lena hastily shoved her notebook into her apron pocket, stepped out from behind the counter, and edged into a corner near the old coffee machine, hoping to become so invisible no one would notice her. But when she glanced up, the eyes of the man, now she knew his name was Nathaniel Quinn, were looking directly at her, calm, unjudging, unmoving. He stood in the center of the room, silent as though waiting for everyone to grasp what was really happening. Clay switched into his usual fake politeness tone, the one he used whenever someone from corporate dropped by. We've gathered everyone, sir. May I ask the reason for your visit? Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved across the line of staff in front of him, from the dishwasher boy with pancake batter on his face, to the gray-haired prep cook wringing her hands in front of her apron. Finally, his gaze landed on Lena. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just tilted his head slightly, a subtle gesture, but one that nearly made Lena collapse. He remembered her. He hadn't forgotten. Nathaniel took one step forward. I'm Nathaniel Quinn, Chief Executive Officer of Heartfire Hospitality. The room fell completely silent. A spoon slipped from the hand of a waitress named Jenna and hit the floor with a sharp clink, the only sound. All eyes shifted from him to Clay, whose face instantly drained of color. His lips moved but produced no sound. Lena didn't dare breathe. She had given the CEO of the entire corporation both a towel and a free coffee. She had given away company property without knowing who he was. She had thought it was kindness, but now it might mean the end. Nathaniel continued, his voice not loud, not theatrical, but clear and steady, like a presentation before a boardroom. I'm conducting a special internal audit across the system, unannounced, without regional approval, and completely anonymous. Over the past 3 months, I've visited 19 branches, including those in Cincinnati, Omaha, and most recently Denver. Last night was my second time at Rosie's, but the first time I actually stepped inside. He paused. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Lena stared at the tip of her shoe, her face burning. Nathaniel went on. My goal is to observe work environments, management practices, and particularly the culture of how we treat frontline staff, the people who keep Heartfire alive each day. I'm not here to rate portion sizes or sales volume. I'm here to observe people. A chill ran down Lena's spine. She realized that every action she took last night, from the towel she had carefully kept clean to that small nod that said, "It's on me," had been witnessed and remembered by this man. And though he hadn't spoken her name, Lena knew exactly what he was referring to. Nathaniel looked straight at Clay. I'll be staying here for a few days. I want to speak with each staff member individually about the work environment. I'll also be reviewing personnel files, security footage, customer feedback from the last 6 months, and any internal complaints filed. Any misconduct, if it exists, will be dealt with according to corporate policy. Clay was speechless, his face pale. Lena just wanted to disappear from the planet. Nathaniel concluded with a line that made Lena's heart nearly stop. And lastly, I want to thank an employee who treated a complete stranger with unconditional kindness. Someone who didn't need to know who I was, who expected nothing in return. That act reminded me why I started Heartfire in the first place. He turned to leave. No names, no further eye contact. But Lena knew. She knew. They all knew. Clay stammered a few generic phrases and dismissed the group. And Lena, though standing among a crowd, felt herself slipping into a separate space, where all concepts of right and wrong, fear, gratitude, and shame collided. She had been kind for no reason, and now that kindness had returned, not as a reward, but as a light shining on her in a way she had never imagined, as a chance. But in that very light, Lena discovered a fear greater than losing her job, being seen, being known, being pulled out of the shadows. And that was sometimes harder to face than any blizzard. Lena Morrison sat motionless on a plastic chair in the corner of the prep kitchen, rubber gloves still on her hands after finishing a tray of baking dishes. Her eyes stayed fixed on the back door, the same door through which, just an hour earlier, Nathaniel Quinn, the CEO of Heartfire Hospitality, had walked out following the surprise meeting that had left the entire Rosie's Diner shaken. Clay's shirt back had been drenched in sweat as he hurried into the manager's office, slamming the door behind him as if muffling sound alone could hold back the incoming tidal wave. The others, from the young waitress Jenna to the aging cook named Luis, had returned to their stations, but no one really resumed their normal rhythm. No talking, no joking. Everyone was breathing in short, shallow breaths, as if trying not to be noticed, not to leave a trace. Lena was different. She didn't pretend everything was fine. She knew she was being watched. She knew it from the moment Nathaniel's gaze lingered too long on her during the meeting. She knew it from the way his words about an unconditional act of kindness had drawn every pair of eyes toward her, as if they all suddenly understood. There was no one else it could be. What she didn't know was that, in that moment, Nathaniel was also facing a test of his own. He wasn't just there as a CEO. He was there as someone who had once lost the soul of the dream he had built. And for the first time in years, he had seen it come back to life. Not in a strategic plan or a growth chart, but in the quiet, ordinary act of a night shift waitress. So now in his mind, it wasn't about launching a sweeping reform. It was one specific question. How do you save someone like Lena without making her feel pitied? How do you help her understand that she isn't someone who needs saving, but someone so valuable she must not be overlooked? That afternoon, Nathaniel returned to Rosie's, but not through the front entrance. He came in the back, wearing a baseball cap and a dusty denim jacket, doing his best not to add more tension to the already taut atmosphere. He knew Clay would be defensive no matter what, so he chose to arrive during the shift change, the time most prone to errors. Just as he suspected, the diner was in disarray. Deliveries hadn't been checked in, the cooler was showing signs of malfunction, and Clay was losing his temper over a table number being miswritten on a ticket. Nathaniel stood in the kitchen corner, notebook in hand, recording everything. He saw how Clay yelled at Jenna for a mistake that wasn't hers, how he kicked aside a crate of produce instead of moving it properly, how he glared at Lena while she cleared a tray of trash, as if waiting for her to slip up. But what Nathaniel noticed most was Lena's response. She didn't flinch, didn't rush, didn't push back. She simply worked in silence, eyes watchful, lips pressed tightly as if she had learned to lock every feeling deep inside. And somehow, that only made Nathaniel more certain. This was exactly the kind of person the system forgot, the kind that didn't ask, didn't disrupt, didn't complain. But if people like her weren't protected, they would eventually disappear from the environment he once believed was built to nurture humble dreams. Once his notes were complete, Nathaniel called Clay into the manager's office. The door closed behind them, and the unofficial audit began. He didn't need to raise his voice or make threats. A few printed emails from customer complaints, a simple chart showing Rosie's employee turnover rate was triple the company average, and a timeline of procedural violations over the past 3 weeks were enough to make Clay stammer. Nathaniel never mentioned Lena, not once, and that, more than anything, made Clay nervous. When asked about using pressure-inducing language, Clay denied it. When shown a security clip where he grabbed Lena's wrist the previous week, he claimed it was a standard gesture to get someone's attention. Nathaniel showed no reaction. He wrote down every statement without commentary, and when Clay asked if he could submit a written explanation later, Nathaniel simply nodded and said evenly, "I'll wait until the end of the week. If no reasonable justification is provided, HR will handle the matter." Leaving the manager's office, Nathaniel sat alone at a booth. He didn't order food, just a black coffee, this time brewed by Lena. She brought it out and placed it on the table without a word. He said nothing either. Both played the roles they were in. She, the waitress, he, the customer. But as she turned to walk away, Nathaniel spoke softly. "Thank you for the towel that night." She paused, her back still to him, but didn't respond. Then she walked away. He understood. She wasn't ready yet. That night, Nathaniel didn't sleep. He opened Lena's full employee record, reading everything from her initial application to the most recent performance review. Not a single blemish. Always on time. Always volunteered to cover when others called out. Never requested a day off. Not one customer complaint. Not a single disciplinary note. But what broke his heart most was that all this effort had only earned her minimum wage, a part-time contract to avoid benefits eligibility, and a sleeping space under a broken light in the back lot. The very system he had built, even if unintentionally, had let someone like Lena slip into invisibility. And so he decided, tomorrow he would approach her. Not as a CEO, not as a benefactor, but as someone who understood that she deserved to be invited into the light on her own 2 feet. Nathaniel Quinn stood quietly under the leafless tree behind Rosie's diner, wrapped in a thick dark brown trench coat, leather notebook in hand, eyes following the slow and methodical closing movements of the diner after the night shift. The dim yellow kitchen lights spilled out in blotchy pools, like ink bleeding across water, highlighting the familiar silhouette of the person he was waiting for. Lena Morrison. She was gathering the last of the baking trays from the bottom shelf, wiping down the counter, straightening the tablecloths, checking the drafty corners, as if failing to do each task properly might somehow cause the world to tilt. Nathaniel had sat at Rosie's the entire evening, not to observe the management system, not to log infractions, but simply because he couldn't bring himself to leave while Lena was still there. It had been 3 days since their first meeting in the rain, 3 days since she gave him the last clean towel she had, 3 days since her eyes met his, not out of curiosity, not out of fear, but from a kind of quiet recognition, like someone who had once fallen into the void recognizing another hanging from the edge. He had intended to approach her after the staff meeting, to reveal his identity, to offer her a life-changing opportunity, but her expression, when he spoke of unconditional kindness, wasn't one of gratitude. It was guarded, as if she were ready to endure any consequence, so long as no one crossed the invisible line she had drawn to survive. And that made him hesitate, not out of doubt, but out of respect. When the shift ended at 10 p.m., Lena didn't head to the changing room like the others. She walked straight out the back door, down the path toward the parking lot, where the single light pole had gone out weeks ago. Nathaniel waited a minute, then followed, keeping enough distance not to alarm her. The snow had stopped falling, but the ground was still damp, the scent of cold grass mixed with passing exhaust fumes biting sharply into his throat. He wasn't sure what he would find, but instinct told him to keep going. And when he stopped behind the second tree at a safe distance, the sight before him froze him in place. Lena was opening the back door of a silver Chevy Impala, worn and dusty, its rear window and wheels coated in grime. She opened the trunk and pulled out a gray fabric bag, then took from it a thin blanket, a pillow, and a plastic bag containing a toothbrush and wet wipes. Everything was laid out with deliberate calmness. No urgency, but no hesitation. She did it like someone who had done it hundreds of times. She spread the blanket over the back seat, placed the pillow, tucked the toiletry bag between the front seats, then removed her coat, folded it neatly, and laid it across the passenger bench. Not a single complaint. No sigh. Only quiet, practiced motion. The movements of someone who had turned a vehicle into a home, a seat into a bed, and silence into the only way to stay whole. Nathaniel remained still, his chest tightening as if a hand had clamped around it. He had seen reports about employees in hardship, had signed off on relief packages after natural disasters, had read emails from the PR team about the Heartfire Cares campaign, but he had never seen with his own eyes someone like Lena, a person who gave away the last ounce of her kindness, now curling up alone in the dark like this. Not because she was incapable, not because she was lazy, but because the system, the very system he had created, had unintentionally left gaps wide enough for people like her to fall through and vanish. She climbed into the back seat, shut the door, pulled the blanket over her shoulders, curled into herself like a small cat warding off the wind. Nathaniel saw the car shake slightly as she adjusted, and then all was still. Only the faint, distant glow reflected off the fogged window remained. She was asleep, in an old car beneath a December sky after serving 10 nonstop hours on her feet. Nathaniel turned away, heart heavy as stone. He didn't go back to the hotel. He got into his car, opened his laptop, and pulled up Lena's employee file. Permanent address, none. Mailing address, P.O. Box. Family status, not disclosed. Wage, $9.85 per hour. Contract, part-time. Actual average hours worked per week, 48. Reason for ineligibility for benefits, insufficient official hours per contract. He scrolled to the performance evaluations. All positive. Volunteered for extra shifts. Never requested time off. Took on the hardest tasks. Customer satisfaction rating, 94%. And yet no record of any raise. No letter of commendation. No indication that anyone had ever truly seen her. Nathaniel typed a line into the internal audit notes section, as if signing a verdict against the very model he had once believed in. Lena Morrison, a textbook case of anonymous exploitation within the Heartfire system. The best employee is the one most thoroughly overlooked. Immediate intervention required. No delay permitted. He typed more, this time slower, as if each word carried the weight of a responsibility he could no longer look away from. Transfer file to the Talent Development and Training Department. Recommend enrollment in internal mentorship program. Arrange temporary housing. Identity confidential. All forms of support must reflect recognition, not charity. He hit send, closed his laptop, but did not drive away. He sat in his car for another 30 minutes, eyes on the fogged rear window where Lena was sleeping. In the dark, he whispered like a vow, "I won't let you disappear." The next morning, the sky had yet to brighten. A thick fog hovered low over the rooftops of Rockford Springs, covering the entire city in a white-gray veil, like a layer of dust blanketing the memories of those who live quietly here. Outside Rosie's diner, delivery trucks rolled slowly through the intersections, as if someone were rewinding an old film in slow motion. Inside the hotel where Nathaniel Quinn was staying, the screen of his laptop lit up for the third time in less than 6 hours. He hadn't slept. Or more accurately, he hadn't allowed himself to sleep. Because after witnessing Lena Morrison turn her old car into a bedroom the night before, he couldn't rest until he'd done one thing: rewrite her entire file. He opened Lena's profile on Heartfire's internal system, but this time, he didn't just read. He edited, not by altering facts or covering anything up, but by filling in the absurd blanks the system had long ignored by default. The first line he changed: contract type, part-time, temporarily updated, to provisional full-time, pending HR review. He knew this adjustment would only be valid for 72 hours without official approval from Human Resources, but it was enough to unlock further interventions. The next section, reason for insurance ineligibility, does not meet minimum hours. He highlighted it and inserted a personal comment. Actual average working hours, 48 hours per week, but split into multiple short shifts in the system to avoid triggering benefit eligibility. Request full audit of clock-in logs for the past 90 days. Possible deliberate schedule manipulation. He paused. This wasn't just an HR violation. It was evidence of benefit circumvention. And if it turned out to be true, Clay wouldn't be the only one facing consequences. Next, he accessed the section titled Pay Raise and Performance Review History. The screen displayed an empty column. No raise requests in 24 months. All performance assessments were labeled meets expectations with generic notes like consistent demeanor, completes tasks, no behavioral issues. Not a single person had noted that Lena regularly picked up shifts for absent coworkers. No mention that she used her own money to buy extra sugar and tea bags when supplies ran out. No acknowledgement that she hadn't taken a single sick day, not once, in 2 years. It was nothing but stability to the point of invisibility. Nathaniel opened another file extracted from the internal reporting system, one that logged customer appreciation submitted through the review app. He entered store code number 118, Rosie's Diner, Rockford, and searched Lena's name. 7 reviews mentioning her had been filed in the past 60 days. One guest wrote, "The server named Lena suggested a different dessert for my son because he's allergic to eggs. Thanks to her, our dinner was complete." Another wrote, "Lena remembers my name and my usual order, even though I only visit once a month. I don't feel like just another customer anymore." Yet none of these were ever pulled by management to include in performance reviews, because Lena never asked. She didn't know how to highlight her own achievements, and the system wasn't built to notice what didn't speak up. Nathaniel clicked Create Exception Profile. This was a feature reserved for the CEO or the VP of HR, allowing a frontline employee to be directly flagged for entry into the internal Mentorship and Talent Elevation program. After completing the standard criteria, he arrived at the required reasoning box. A prompt appeared. Describe why this individual deserves consideration if they do not have outstanding education or experience credentials. Nathaniel rested his hands on the keyboard, then typed, "Because she was kind when no one was looking. Because she worked without seeking a title. Because she preserved the spirit of service in a place that often strips people of their dignity. And because if our system fails to recognize someone like Lena, then our system needs to be rebuilt from scratch." He clicked Save Draft, but didn't submit it. He knew that sending it now would be like throwing her into a spotlight she wasn't ready for. She would reject it. She might even walk away. And if that happened, the only chance for her to step out of the shadows on her own terms would be lost. That afternoon when he returned to Rosie's, Nathaniel didn't arrive as a CEO. He wore a thin sweater, jeans, and a dark baseball cap, taking a seat at the corner of the counter with a black coffee as usual. Lena was the main server that shift. She saw him, didn't avoid him, but didn't initiate anything either. She placed the coffee down, nodded briefly, and turned away. No extra words, no forced smile. Nathaniel understood. 3 days after the staff meeting, she was still on guard, and he had no intention of breaking through that. He waited until near closing time, when the crowd had thinned and Lena was inside wiping down the counter. He stood up, walked over, and placed a small folded piece of paper on the counter without saying a word. She glanced down, eyes wary. The paper read a single line. "I'd like to talk. Not as a CEO, but as someone who owes you an apology and a real opportunity, if you're ready." Below that was the personal phone number he'd used since before founding the company. She said nothing, simply picked up the paper, folded it again, tucked it into her apron pocket, and continued wiping the counter. He didn't push, just nodded and walked away. He didn't know whether she would call, but he knew one thing for certain. For the first time since founding Heartfire, he had rewritten someone's file. Not with a resume, but with respect. Lena Morrison didn't know why her hand kept brushing against that small folded piece of paper, as if it might warm up inside her apron pocket each time she passed through a draft in the kitchen. The phone number was written in a firm, no-frills hand. No embellishment, no explanation. Just a single, concise line that confused her more than it intrigued her. "I need to talk. Not as a CEO, but as someone who owes you an apology and a real opportunity. If you're ready." She had read it 11 times. She knew because she had counted. And each time she read it, her heart sank. Not from hope, but from fear. Some doors, when slammed in your face enough times, will make you flinch even when someone opens them gently. 3 days had passed since Nathaniel Quinn returned to Rosie's and left that note. He hadn't shown up again. No sign of a CEO, no scanning eyes, no invisible pressure trailing him like before. But Lena still felt his presence, in the unusually quiet demeanor of Clay, in the awkwardness on Jenna's face whenever they crossed paths, in the way the employee lockers suddenly had new locks, and the shift schedules were posted more clearly. No one said anything. But that silence only made Lena more uneasy. She had lived too long in the shadows of a system to know. Abrupt change is never just coincidence, especially when the one triggering that change had once sat beneath a storm, trembling with a cup of coffee she had paid for. And now that person was someone who could change her entire fate, if she let him. Lena made the call on the morning of the 4th day. Not because she was sure, but because she knew she wouldn't sleep until she did. Before her shift, still sitting in her car, legs wrapped in a thin blanket, phone resting between her knees, she dialed the number from the paper. Each ring stretched out like time in an ER waiting room. Tense, exhausting, and bracing for any outcome. Nathaniel's voice came on the third ring. No pretense, no theatrical surprise, just a calm, low, genuine tone. Lena. She took a deep breath. I can meet with you, but only if you're not going to say things like, you deserve more, or I believe in your potential. I can't take any more of that. He didn't laugh. He simply replied, none of that. I just want to give you the truth and let you decide. She agreed to meet him at 10 a.m. the next day at a cafe at the end of Main Street, a place she hadn't stepped into since losing her apartment. When Lena arrived, Nathaniel was already there. Not the CEO, no suit, just a man in a navy sweater, dark slacks, holding a cup of hot cocoa like everyone else. He stood as she approached. No handshake, no grand gesture, just a nod and a quiet motion to the chair across from him. Lena offered a soft, thank you, pulled out the chair, set her canvas bag on the floor. There was no awkwardness, but there was also no familiarity. Between them lay a space that couldn't be bridged with small talk. He didn't stall. His first words were, I want to invite you to join Heartfire's internal training program, a 6-month residency at headquarters in Chicago. All housing, training, and living expenses covered. It's a program reserved for employees with exceptional qualities within the system. I think you should consider it. Lena didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a few seconds, as if waiting for him to add something more. When he didn't, she spoke slowly. You're right. It's an opportunity. He nodded. But I can't take it. Her voice wasn't shaky, not hesitant, not defiant. It was simply a statement of reality, spoken plainly. Nathaniel said nothing. A long silence followed. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush to counter. He only asked one question. Why? Lena turned her gaze to the window. Outside was Rockford Springs Street, dusted with snow, storefronts slowly opening. Because I can't trade the one thing I have left for a promise from someone in power. She continued without waiting for a response. I've traded before. I left school, left home, gave up my dreams to care for my mom. And when she died, I gave up even more just to keep this job. Every time I've tried to believe in something brighter, the price has been the only stability I had. Nathaniel tilted his head. But Lena, this isn't like before. This isn't charity. She nodded. I know, but the problem is, I'm no longer capable of accepting an opportunity. I can't gamble what little I have now on something that might fall apart. I don't need someone to change my life. I need to protect the part of it that isn't in danger. This time, Nathaniel had no rebuttal. He could see clearly. She wasn't rejecting him out of mistrust. She was rejecting the very idea of placing her life in the hands of anything she couldn't control with her own 2 hands. And he couldn't blame her. After everything she'd been through, her survival instinct had become not opening the door to anything that might strip away the last fragile layer of safety. They left the cafe after 30 minutes of silence. No decision was made, no promises, just 2 people walking in different directions from the same place. One wanting to help, and the other unable to accept help, even as her heart brimmed with gratitude. That night, Lena lay in her car, staring at the ceiling, sleepless. The slip of paper with Nathaniel's number was still in her apron pocket. She hadn't thrown it away, but she didn't call either, because some wounds don't hurt anymore. But they're still big enough to keep you from moving forward, even when the light is right ahead. Lena Morrison didn't think she'd see him again, at least not this soon. 3 days had passed since their meeting at the cafe. 3 days since she turned down one of the only offers she was sure was genuine. In her mind, that should have been the end of it. He, Nathaniel Quinn, should have returned to his high-rise office, far removed from people like her. And she, as always, would retreat to the back seat of her freezing Chevy, returning to the quiet rhythm she knew so well. But this afternoon, as she was taking out the trash behind Rosie's, hands still smudged with dried tomato sauce from the prep station, she saw him standing there, by the rotting wooden fence. No suit, no heavy coat, just a thin sweater and an unevenly wrapped scarf that clearly couldn't hold back the wind whipping through Rockford's narrow alleys. She froze for a moment, hands still gripping the trash bag, her heart skipping a beat. Then she stepped forward, dropped the bag into the dumpster, closed the lid, and turned to leave. But he spoke, not loudly, not urgently, just enough to stop her without forcing her. I'm not here to talk about opportunity. No offers. I just need to speak the truth. Lena didn't turn back, but she didn't walk away either. He stepped closer, not too close, just enough so she wouldn't feel cornered into a conversation, enough that if she chose to walk past him, she could. I came here, he said, voice steady and low, not to audit the system, not to prove I still understand the ground level. I came because something in what I believed I had built stopped making sense, and you were the first person to show me that. Lena exhaled softly, still silent. He continued, every word like peeling off a heavy coat in the middle of a snowstorm. I'm the one who designed the employee assessment program Clay used to downgrade your contract. I'm the one who approved the flexible part-time model to optimize operating costs. I signed off on the scheduling matrix that prevents workers from hitting benefits thresholds unless absolutely necessary. And then I sat in my office watching quarterly profits grow, believing the system was doing the right thing. He paused, voice quieter now. Until you place that towel beside a cup of coffee. There's no field in a report for that towel. No chart can measure what it meant. Lena slowly turned to face him, for the first time since that morning at the cafe. Her eyes weren't angry, weren't forgiving either, but they were steady. They were like mirrors, reflecting everything he had just confessed and silently asking, and then what? Nathaniel took a breath, fingers tightening around the knit cap in his coat pocket, then releasing. I've read your entire file, every shift you covered, every customer note. I know how long you've lived in that car. I watched you turn it into a bedroom, each motion like a practiced ritual. And I know I can't undo what's already happened, but I can fix the part I'm responsible for. Lena said nothing. Snow began falling quietly, dusting her shoulders like powder. She asked slowly, why me? There are thousands like me in your system, some worse off. Nathaniel nodded, eyes not leaving hers. Because you were the first to give me the most while asking for nothing. Because I believe if someone can preserve their dignity in silence, then that same person has the strength to step into a space where their voice matters, if given the right path. Lena gave a soft, dry laugh. The problem is, you want to bring me into a world you helped design, a world I don't believe I belong to. Nathaniel shook his head. I'm not trying to pull you up. I want to bring you in, as someone who will help me rebuild it. For the first time, Lena blinked slower than usual. She didn't reject. She didn't agree. It was just a silence, longer, denser than any conversation they'd had. Then she said, almost in a whisper, I used to study hospitality management, customer service track, 2.5 years at Johnson & Wales. I once dreamed of opening a small bistro with 3 tables on the patio and a seasonal menu that changed weekly. I was called the most promising student in my class. Then my mom got diagnosed with cancer. Insurance didn't cover everything. I dropped out, took 3 jobs to pay for her treatment. Then came the bills, then credit card debt, then losing our home. I don't regret any of it. I got 10 extra months with my mom that no one thought possible. But since the day she passed, I haven't let myself think about anything called the future. Her voice didn't shake, but as she finished, her hand tightened in the coat pocket. Nathaniel didn't interrupt. He stood there, letting the cold wind cut through his collar, letting her words sink into every corner of his mind like shards of glass. Lena continued, I'm not afraid of failure. I'm afraid of believing in something again and losing it all over. And if I lose one more thing, I don't know what I'll have left to keep living for. Nathaniel stepped forward, just enough to be heard without raising his voice. Then let me offer nothing. No promises, no guarantees, just a clear path. 6 months of training with housing, income, and the right to return if you choose not to continue. No expectations, no strings. If you go, you learn something. If you don't, at least you made a decision based on knowledge, not fear. Lena looked at him for a long time. Finally, she gave a slight nod. Not because I believe you, but because I made a promise to my mother that I wouldn't let fear last forever. Nathaniel didn't say anything more. He simply reached out his hand, slowly, as if ready to pull it back if she didn't want it. She stared at it for a few seconds, then reached out and held it gently. It wasn't a grip of obligation, not a beginning, but it was the first time in Lena's life she knew, with certainty, that it came without conditions. Lena Morrison stepped into the third-floor conference room of Heartfire's headquarters in Chicago with a feeling she couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear, nor excitement. It was a quiet stillness inside, like the kind that comes after someone has cried too much and finally runs out of tears, leaving only the hollow space after the storm. She wore the crisp white shirt issued as part of the onboarding uniform, a light gray tie loosely knotted at her neck, her hair neatly tied back, her face bare. Not out of defiance, but because she no longer felt the need to cover herself. It wasn't the first time she had stood within clean walls, under evenly distributed white lighting, surrounded by people dressed in sharply pressed clothes. But it was the first time in years that she didn't feel like she was entering forbidden ground. The orientation began precisely at 8 a.m. Beside her were 8 others, of varying ages, genders, and backgrounds. One had been an executive chef at a five-star restaurant in Seattle, but lost his job in an internal lawsuit. Another was a single mom who used to run a taco truck. A former soldier had just completed PTSD recovery. No one talked about why they were there, but each carried the same guarded expression: hope, held just close enough not to get hurt again. Sarah Chin, the director of the mentorship program, opened the session. No long speeches, no motivational fluff. She made it clear from the beginning: we're not here to save anyone. We're here to reclaim what should have been invested in, but was forgotten. The next 6 months will not be comfortable. This is a boot camp. It will wring out what you thought were your strengths. If you make it through, you'll earn the power to make change. If not, you'll leave with a new understanding of who you are. Lena didn't flinch, didn't lower her gaze. She took in every word as if etching it into the survival thread inside her. She wasn't here to breathe easier. She was here to prove that the years she lived in the dust hadn't hollowed her out. The orientation ended with an anonymous survey, asking them to write out the path they had taken, not to speak of dreams, only to name the wrong turns. Lena took the pen, sat at the back left table, and began to write in steady slanted print. I once chose to leave school, not because I was unmotivated, but because I had to choose between class and my mother's radiation bill. I once chose to work 3 jobs, not out of greed, but because there was no other way. I once chose to live in a car, not because I didn't know how to find housing, but because a $900 apartment wasn't worth losing 2 meals a day. And I once chose silence, because saying something wouldn't have changed a thing. When she placed the pen down, the paper wasn't beautiful, wasn't emotional, but every word felt like digging with bare hands to unearth something long buried. A dream. 3 days later, official training began. At 6 a.m., trainees reported to the test kitchen. They rotated shifts, split into teams, took turns cooking, serving, debating, presenting. Lena wasn't the best, but she was the fastest. Not fast in technique, but in instinct, because she didn't need time to learn how to respond. She had lived 6 years in an environment where no one taught her anything, yet she had to know everything. When the instructor spoke about managing customer emotions, she could instantly describe 3 types of guests who were likely to explode if their eggs weren't runny enough. When they discussed regionally adapted menu design, she needed only 3 minutes to rework Rosie's menu by season, something Clay had never once considered. By the second week, Sarah called her into a private office, not to praise her, but to ask, "Where do you plan to go with this ability?" Lena sat upright, unafraid. She replied, "I want to create a space for people like me. No degrees, no pedigree, but real ethics, to do the work without being seen as cheap labor." Sarah nodded. "Good, but you'll have to say that in front of 10 people like me and make them believe it." Lena didn't blink. "I'll make them not need to believe it. They'll just see it." At night, she returned to the small apartment provided in the employee residence building, a studio with a real bed, real windows, hot water, and wooden floors that weren't rotting. On the desk, she placed an old photo, her and her mother, taken at her freshman orientation. Her mother, hair still thick, smile wider than her face, hand on Lena's shoulder as if sending a signal only she could decode. Go. Don't come back until it's done. And now she had gone. Even if it took 10 years. Even if she had to sleep 10 months in the backseat of a car. Even if she had to hand a towel to a rain-soaked stranger at midnight, never knowing he'd be the one to pull her from the sinking ground. In the fourth week of the program, she was selected to lead her group in a project to improve service flow for small format stores. She proposed shift-specific uniforms so staff wouldn't have to re-wear damp shirts. She recommended installing hand warmers next to sinks during winter. She suggested rapid emotional response training for night shifts. None of her ideas were revolutionary, but each one made the room nod, because no one else had seen those details from lived experience the way she had. At the end of that day, as she stepped out of the meeting room, Nathaniel was waiting in the hallway. He said nothing, just handed her a small box. She opened it. Inside was a plastic badge that read, Access to Restricted Level, HQ Training Kitchen. Below it, in fine print, Welcome, Lena Morrison. You belong here. She closed the box, didn't cry, but for the first time in her life, she smiled without guilt, because she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, good things still come, even when they've been buried in dust too long. 32 minutes. That was how long Lena Morrison sat staring at her phone screen, her finger resting on the call button, unable to press it. On the screen was the number for Sarah Chin, director of the mentorship program and the sender of the email she had received earlier that morning. The subject line was brief. Executive opportunity, urgent discussion required. Beneath that, a single line. CEO Nathaniel Quinn has requested a private meeting with you at 10 a.m. tomorrow. You are free to decline, but know this. This is not a social invitation. There were no additional details, no attachments, no hints at the content. Just a message carrying a weight that even Lena, who had survived 10 months living in a car without losing her kindness, found unsettling. She set the phone down on the wooden table, pulled out a sticky note, wrote 3 lines, then tore it up. Wrote 4 new lines, then crumpled that too. She repeated this 6 times, until the table before her was littered with wadded-up paper, each one like a piece of her current state of mind, unable to find words that felt right. Finally, she stood up, walked out to the balcony of her 14th floor apartment, where she could take in the view of a February morning in Chicago. Rooftops blanketed in frost, traffic moving with winter patience, and, far off in the distance, a faint but real shimmer of sunlight. She leaned against the freezing railing, let the wind slap her face awake, then turned back inside, picked up the phone, and hit call. Sarah answered on the second ring. This is Sarah. Lena swallowed hard. It's me, Lena Morrison. A short pause, then Sarah's voice softened slightly. I assume you read the email. Lena nodded, knowing no one could see it. I did, but I don't understand. Sarah replied quickly. There's nothing to understand right now. You just need to be ready for the meeting. It's scheduled in the executive conference room on the 26th floor. Business formal attire. No need to prepare a presentation. Mr. Quinn wants to talk to you about your future. Lena took a deep breath. Do I have the right to decline? Sarah answered honestly. Yes. But I don't think you want to. Lena fell silent, then slowly said, I'll be there. The next morning, Lena stood before the mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she buttoned up a borrowed black blouse, one lent by a peer from the cohort. Her slacks were the only pair that still fit well, and the polished black shoes had been scrubbed clean the night before. No lipstick, no bracelets, just a fountain pen tucked into her breast pocket. The same pen her mother had gifted her when she got into college, now carried as a symbol of an unfinished promise. At 9:58 a.m., Lena stood before the tall glass doors of the 26th floor, beneath the steel-etched Heartfire logo, her hand gently tightening around the strap of her bag. At exactly 10 o'clock, Sarah stepped out, gave a small nod. He's waiting. Lena entered. The room was large and bright, with walnut floors and black and white photos of the company's first restaurants lining the walls. At the center stood a long wooden table, and at its head, Nathaniel Quinn. No suit jacket, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, writing something on a whiteboard. When he saw her, he turned around and nodded. "Thank you for coming." Lena nodded back, said nothing. Nathaniel gestured to the seat opposite him. She sat down, kept her posture straight. No leaning back, no relaxing. Nathaniel sat across from her, his hands resting on the table. There were no folders, no laptop, just a single plastic badge, the kind used for secure access, placed between them. He began. "I'll be brief. After 3 months of observing and 6 weeks watching you work within the mentorship program, I'm convinced you have regional-level management capability, not potential, demonstrated skill." Lena held his gaze. He continued. "We're restructuring 12 branches in the Midwest. 3 of them are at risk of being sold off if things don't improve. I need someone to lead a recovery initiative. Not someone with an executive title, but someone who understands the ground. I want to offer you the role of regional transition lead. You'd oversee those first 3 branches. Full authority to adjust staff, revise procedures, initiate training interventions. You'd report directly to me." Lena's face didn't change, but inside her heart was pounding, not from fear, but because what he'd just said was like someone opening a door she had long stopped daring to look at. Nathaniel pushed the badge toward her. "This is a regional access card. Only 3 people currently have one. I'm not pressuring you. You have 3 days to decide. If you say no, you can continue the program and select a position at HQ. But I believe that if you work on the front lines, you'll change more than if you sit behind a desk writing reports." Lena didn't touch the badge. She looked at him, not with doubt, but with a steady calm. "I'm someone who once lived in my car, who used to be dismissed at shift briefings. Are you sure I'm the one who should be making decisions for an entire regional system?" Nathaniel didn't blink. "Precisely because you lived in your car, because you've been dismissed, you won't do that to others, and that's what the system is missing." Lena said nothing. She stood up, gave a respectful nod, and left the room, without taking the badge. 3 days later, the badge was placed back on Nathaniel's desk, along with a handwritten note in violet ink. "If this system has the courage to give a chance to those it once pushed aside, then I have the courage to take it. Lena Morrison." Naomi Fields never thought she'd be sitting in a room like this. Glass walls overlooking the city, high ceilings bathed in soft golden light, and every detail radiating the kind of structured silence that only places of real power can hold. She sat upright in a leather chair, not leaning back, both hands resting lightly on her knees, her eyes fixed on the far end of the table, where a man in a blue shirt was reading through a folder. Nathaniel Quinn hadn't said a word for the first 2 minutes. He flipped through pages, scribbling notes in neat, slanted handwriting along the margins. Naomi didn't ask anything. She had learned one thing over the past few months. Patience is not a strategy. It's a reflection of confidence. Finally, Nathaniel looked up. "I want you to tell me the last 3 times you felt unheard." Naomi was surprised by the question, but not shaken. "Last week, in the meeting with the North Ops team, I suggested a change to the morning resupply cycle because it was causing waste. The regional manager replied that the process had already been standardized from HQ and needed no adjustment. A week before that, I sent an email reporting that a new employee was repeatedly being skipped in shift assignments. No one responded. And a month ago, I proposed restructuring the evening front desk placement because its current spot exposed staff to excessive guest interference. I was told I was being too sensitive." Nathaniel nodded. "Thank you. Now tell me 3 things you did without permission, and the outcomes were positive." Naomi furrowed her brows, then replied slowly. "I moved the bread tray during peak hours to reduce crowding, even though it changed the service flow. Sales rose by 11% over the next 3 days. I allowed an employee to split her shift because she's a single mother and needed to pick up her child, even though it broke the original roster. She became the highest performing team member that month, and I hosted an internal dinner using my own money to help the team reconnect, even though no one required it. After that, the rate of unexpected call-offs dropped to nearly 0. Nathaniel gave a slight smile. "Do you know why I asked those questions?" Naomi nodded. "Because listening and taking initiative don't conflict with each other. But most people don't believe that." Nathaniel set his pen down and slid a document folder toward her. "This is the formal proposal. I want you to take the position of Regional Executive Director of Chicago North. You would be the first woman of color to hold this position in the Heart Fire system, and the youngest. Naomi kept her expression calm, but inside warmth surged through her chest like spring water. She picked up the folder and skimmed through the pages. I won't be a symbolic face, will I? Nathaniel shook his head. Number, I need you because you understand silence, and you know when it's time to break it. Naomi gave a slight nod. Then I accept. 3 weeks later, Naomi walked into the headquarters of the Northern Region branch as the new leader, but she didn't arrive in a power suit, didn't deliver a welcome speech, didn't post any directives on the board. She stood behind the prep station at 7 a.m., sleeves rolled up, working the opening shift alongside the team. She greeted each person, asked their name, their shift, the dish they hated serving most. No distance, no speeches, just presence. On the third day, she called a back-of-house staff meeting, not in the conference room, but right in the kitchen area, just after the lunch shift. She stood in the center, holding a personal notebook. I know a lot of you are thinking, here comes another new boss. More promises, a few weeks of observation, then everything stays the same. I don't blame you. If I were you, I'd think that too. No one said anything. Naomi continued. I didn't come to promise. I came to take notes. One by one over the next 3 days, I'll spend 20 minutes with each of you, just listening. No response, no judgment. And after that, I'll compile what I've heard. If I misunderstand something, correct me. If I miss anything, tell me again. This isn't a reform program. It's a shift. She pulled out a stack of small cards from her pocket. If you want to talk privately, take a card. Write your name. Drop it in this box. I won't force anyone, but I'll be waiting. Over the next 4 days, the box overflowed. Naomi listened to 38 staff members, from the doorman to the sous chef. She wrote everything down in a handwritten file, never sending an email. And in the following 2 weeks, she began implementing changes, not starting from process, but from people. She reassigned 2 notoriously abrasive managers, not fired them. She called them in, opened her notes, read out the most candid feedback from their peers, then asked, do you want to change or transfer? One of them cried. The other requested a transfer to the warehouse. Naomi didn't record them as failures. She recognized them as people who had never been listened to long enough to relearn how to communicate. The story of Naomi Fields spread across the system in 8 weeks, but she didn't grant internal interviews, didn't appear on the corporate newsletter. She declined a photo for the Wall of Honor. She left only one sentence in a letter to all staff upon completing her trial leadership phase. I didn't come to lead. I came to clear a path for voices that have been forgotten. In the first senior executive board meeting Naomi was invited to, someone asked her how she had increased revenue in the northern region. Naomi looked directly at them and said, I didn't increase revenue. The people who used to be called unimportant did, once they knew their voices actually mattered. The entire room fell silent, not out of shock, but because, for the first time, someone had said out loud what everyone secretly knew but no one dared to admit. Trust cannot be bought with salary. It's built by listening and proving that you've listened. And that is how Naomi Fields, the same woman once reprimanded for standing too long behind the counter without smiling, rose to a position no one thought she deserved, not by trying to prove she was worthy, but by helping others feel that they were too. 3 months after officially assuming the role of regional director, Naomi Fields sat in an unprecedented meeting of Heartfire Hospitality, a senior culture hearing convened by CEO Nathaniel Quinn himself. No flashy backdrop, no slides, just a round room with 30 chairs, all equal, no head of the table, no podium. And while the other regional directors arrived in dark suits, hair neatly styled, ties selected as if they were silent declarations of power, Naomi Fields walked in wearing a simple white shirt, her hair tied in a clean bun, and a small pin. No title, just 3 engraved words. I hear you. There were no introductions, no applause, just one empty chair between 2 directors who had both been named Strategic Leader of the Year. Naomi pulled out the chair and sat. She said nothing. In front of her, she placed a thick folder wrapped in brown craft paper, handwritten on the cover, "What's not in the quarterly report." CEO Nathaniel looked at her and gave a subtle nod. You have 12 minutes. Naomi didn't take a mic. She didn't need one. I'm not here to list achievements. I'm here to tell 3 stories that no one wrote down. The first story is about a chef named Jordan at Branch 16. He was once suspended for not smiling while serving dinner to a difficult group of guests. No one asked what he had lost that week. No one knew his mother had passed away 3 days earlier. I spoke with him, listened, and learned that what he needed wasn't sympathy. It was the right to remain silent in a system that constantly demands a smile. Today, he's the kitchen manager, with the highest team retention rate in the entire system. The second story is about a cleaning staff member named Teresa. She wrote a resignation letter not because anyone mistreated her, but because after 4 years of working, no one remembered her name. I read her letter and asked just one question. If I remember your name, will you stay? She burst into tears and stayed. The third story is about myself. I once worked night shifts at Branch 9. I was once called that girl behind the counter who doesn't know how to talk. I once borrowed a friend's shirt because I couldn't afford a new uniform. I was once denied a promotion because I was not mature enough. But today I sit here, not to prove them wrong, but to tell you, I once sat at the last booth of this restaurant, listening to you all talk about the future of this system, while no one knew who I was. And there are hundreds still sitting at that booth, quietly doing their part, waiting for someone to stop talking about strategy and finally ask, "Are you okay?" The room fell silent for a long beat. Nathaniel didn't interrupt. She continued, I don't promise that everything I do is right. I only know this. I cannot lead if I've never been overlooked, and I cannot rebuild culture without seeing the fractures in each person. Naomi gently closed the folder. 12 minutes are up. That day, she didn't sign any new directive. She wasn't given a new title. No internal article was written about her speech. But within the next 2 weeks, the number of withdrawn resignation letters dropped by 63%. A confidential internal survey showed the rate of feeling heard among frontline employees nearly doubled. And the following month, the company began piloting a new model, the listening booth, an initiative Naomi had once scribbled in her personal notebook. A small corner in each branch where any employee could leave something they needed to say. No name required, no title needed, no promises necessary. That afternoon, Naomi returned to Branch 9, where she had once worked as a barista. No prior notice. She entered through the back door, walking the hallway where the dim yellow lights still glowed just as they used to. She stopped at the last booth, the one where she used to eat a quick meal during breaks. A young employee was wiping down the table. He looked up, slightly startled. Naomi smiled. Mind if I sit here? The boy stepped aside. Naomi sat down and looked around. Nothing had changed, except for one small plaque in the corner. Booth of Beginnings. A manager stepped out, slightly flustered. Ms. Fields? Naomi stood and shook his hand. I'm just stopping by. No need for any reports. Then she asked, how many people on your team have never had their name mentioned in any meeting? The manager looked at her, a little hesitant. Naomi nodded. I was once one of them. That day she didn't hold a meeting, didn't inspect operations, didn't check performance metrics. She simply sat at the last booth and wrote on a small card, if you're sitting here, thinking no one knows who you are, I do. She left the card on the table, stood up, and walked out. No one called her back. No one asked for a photo. But 2 days later, the manager from that branch sent her an email with the subject line, we've started calling everyone by name. 3 months later, Naomi was officially invited to the executive board, not just as a symbol, but as the leader in charge of human development and internal culture. She kept her old approach, meeting each new employee not through Zoom, not via email, but with a handwritten note, welcome, I'm listening. At an industry conference in Austin, when asked about her secret to employee retention during a labor crisis, Naomi replied with just one sentence. They don't want to leave. They just want to be seen. The story of Naomi Fields, from the back booth of a small restaurant to the boardroom table, had no dramatic climax, no coronation moment. It was a long journey of presence, of unconditional listening, and of turning her own scars into bridges for others to heal. And in a world where voices are often drowned out by the sound of money, Naomi reminded us of one simple truth. Not everyone needs to be lifted, but everyone deserves to be called by name. Perhaps the most moving part isn't that Naomi Fields got to sit in a seat of power, but how she chose to get there. Not through applause, but through listening. Not with authority, but with patience for those the world had forgotten. And if you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever sat quietly in a corner while no one seemed to notice, then this story isn't just about Naomi. It's about you, about us, the people who are quietly trying to hold on to their dignity in a world too rushed to really look at one another. If this ending made you feel a little lighter, if it reminded you of someone who truly listened to you when no one else did, comment their name below. If this story made you angry at the systems that judge people too quickly based on a file or appearance, drop a to let us know you've been there too. And if you believe kindness still has the power to rebuild this world, subscribe to this channel so we can keep sharing stories like this every week. Don't forget to share this video with the first person who came to your mind. Because maybe, just maybe, they're sitting in a booth somewhere right now, waiting for someone to truly listen.